Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Hello and welcome to our new short format servings of consciously prepared brain food designed to improve your mental fitness. This is Lisa Cypers, Kamen, your host. For more than 12 years, we've been proudly and consistently crafting harvesting happiness and sharing it with you. Each week, we spotlight diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. We invite you to listen up and change the way you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Alrighty then, let's dive in. This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where we will explore Psychedelia, Tales of Mindtrips and Healing. My guest today is Andy Mitchell. Andy Mitchell is a clinical neuropsychologist who has treated patients with various neurological and psychiatric conditions, including brain trauma, dementia, epilepsy, depression, and anxiety disorders. He's coming to us today from London. He is the author of 10 Trips, the New Reality of Psychedelics. Andy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I can't wait to dive in here. First of all, I want to give a little bit of background because you have a very unique story that brought you to the authorship of this book. It's been a long road with lots of different things.
Right. I mean, in a nutshell, I went to Oxford University. I did an English literature degree, and I got very absorbed in philosophy, which most of which was done in the pub, listening to punk music. And in short, I felt pretty foul of alcohol and recreational drugs in my late teens and early 20s and stopped there and then, and haven't taken any drugs for 25 years. Following that, I had a 3-year stint as a monk in California, and I set up an NGO for homeless people in the UK. And it was only after that that I came to clinical neuroscience. So I had a sort of 20-year career in clinical neuroscience, and about 4 or 5 years ago, I took a sabbatical and went to research mindfulness applications and how it might be used with neurological populations. And whilst touring the world, looking at those sort of things, I bumped into a lady in California in a car park, in Whole Foods car park. She walked across the car park. I left a note in her windscreen wiper because she looked like she had some afterglow, something about her, inviting her for a cup of tea. We had a cup of tea, and then she started pitching to me why I needed to do psychedelics. This is I had no substances for nearly 25 years, and she's pitching it. And it went on and on for about a week or two until eventually I found myself in some maloca in a forest above Santa Cruz, smoking toad venom through a crack pipe. And this was shortly after Michael Pollan's book had come out, and I read the book, and I'd had this experience, which, as John Hopkins said, was right up there in the top 3 in my life. And I started thinking about it. It was terrifying and moving and ineffable and all those things. And I put it in my mental pipe and left it for a while until a couple of years later, my publishers approached me and said, "We feel that it's time for a different kind of book about psychedelics." The hype train had left the station and everything was getting blown up, and there was commercialization. There was this evidence that was coming out in different fields about psychedelics. And they said, "Can you do something that's both sort of cerebral, but a little bit wonkier and broader than Michael Pollan's book, that captures the whole psychedelic field, really, not just the science of it, but the culture around it?" So that was the genesis for 10 Trips.
Well, as an existentially curious guy, you take us on quite the journey with 10 Trips, the New Reality of Psychedelics. Talk a little bit about your experience on psychedelics when you tried this with this woman's guidance up in the mountains above Santa Cruz. And you have a healthy dose of skepticism in the work too, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, well, okay. So I'd had one experience with psychedelics, and I thought that's nothing to base a book on. So 10 trips, because I want to try every single major psychedelic out there, and to do it in 10 very different contexts. So starting with a neuroimaging lab in Imperial College, where I get into an fMRI scanner with a huge dose of DMT going through a drip in my arm, that being the start, and then checking off all the different substances, but in very different locations. So take from London to California and to a New Age temple and a church, and then moving gradually south to the indigenous populations and their usages, both sort of the commercial tourism and retreat centers in the Bahamas and Costa Rica, until I end up, with someone in the jungle having it with local tribesmen. And so I think what emerged from that, or one thing that emerged, that there's just very different models for understanding different psychedelics. There's the medical model that's we're very, very familiar with, and we're familiar with it both in terms of the emerging neuroscience from neuroimaging studies, but also from the data that's coming out about psychedelic assisted therapy. And that's the medical model. But then in distinction to that, you've got this non-medical, religious, spiritual model. And within that, you've got huge differences between, say, a New Age retreat center and a Californian shaman versus a shaman that's coming from a long indigenous heritage. And then on top of both of those, aside of the medical and the religious, you've also got this kind of recreational or psychonautical tradition that regards itself as countercultural. And I think the reason why I would say broadly skeptical is that each of these models is trying to lay claim to the truth about psychedelic substances in one way or another, and to distinguish itself in one way or another from the other models. And yet in each case, the psychedelics themselves, the experiences themselves seem to give the model the slip. They're slippery, trickstery things that are, the more you try to nail them, the more they're somewhere over there. They slip through the net of our interpretations. And I think the other thing that I would say is that the models, even though they want to distinguish themselves, are often using aspects of the other models to justify their procedures. So, for example, New Age retreat centers will talk about spirituality on the one hand, but will want to give some kind of neuroscientific account on the other. Meanwhile, John Hopkins, which is the sort of epicenter of psychedelic assisted therapy, will often talk about mystical experiences and how these are really spiritual as much as therapeutic agents. So there's a kind of, you could regard it as a renaissance that's in its very early stages where there's synergy, but at the moment it can feel quite messy.
What comes to mind as you're talking is really the essence of what science is, right? That with science, it's more than just the data, right? That within the scientific community, there is this element of mystery. There is some element that many scientists describe almost spiritual without even using the words spiritual. And that's what I'm hearing you describe. And it might not be an accurate interpretation, though, of like how these things cross-pollinate, right? That within the spiritual community or within the retreat center where they're giving the therapies, they're referring to the scientific research. And in the science lab, they're talking about the spiritual experience.
Yeah, so there's definitely that kind of cross-hatching. I suppose one thing that I've left out of this picture is that commerce has come into it in a fairly major way in the last 5 or 10 years. And I think that distorts some of the science. It in the sense that certain aspects of scientific research become more viable and of interest because they're commercially viable. And to my mind, some of the more interesting research on the actual subjective experiences of psychedelics is from a neuroscientific perspective is a little bit primitive. We're very much in the early stages of it. And some of it tends towards that kind of, well, we've got this area of the brain that lights up and this area of the brain that lights up, which is kind of interest preliminarily, but it's not really building a model for the detailed mechanisms that might be working the brain when it's under psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. I am following what you're saying. Many years ago, oh my gosh, it must have been about 8 years ago, I had a guest on the show. He was a physician from Mexico who was studying the Sonoran toad.
Yeah.
And the man's name escapes me, but it was fascinating. I mean, he was doing tons of research for use in mental health therapies. And it was out there at the time. Right now, this is maybe 2015, 16 that I had him on.
Yeah.
And with that, having said that, it was apparent that there's something to this.
There is unarguably something of amazing potential in terms of psychiatric treatments in a way that's not really been seen for 40 or 50 years. I mean, the last big pharmacological intervention was SSRIs and SNRIs, which is, the best part of 50 years ago. And here, probably for the first time in that instance, are substances that seem to alter brain chemistry in a way that is hugely advantageous to a number of diagnoses. And it's not just the brain chemistry, they're also providing you with these seismic experiences where the whole of reality starts to reconfigure in ways that you have to break through your habits of perspective in order to admit them. And they're so intense, and they turn things around in such a sort of poignant, significant way. For example, it's no mistake that on psychedelics, routinely, I would find myself revisiting the key seminal moments in my life, like my birth, the birth of my kids, my father's death, my own death, over and over again, but in ways that's impossible to imagine. For example, on one occasion, I had the experience of giving birth to my own children, which was remarkable in and of itself. But as soon as I'd done that, I was then found myself cast back to the exact same age as they were. We were babies together, and I got to experience what it was what it was to be like to be a baby with my own babies. Now, I couldn't have made that kind of stuff up, but to sort of live through it for what felt like hours was incredibly, what can I say, just like it cast the whole idea of childhood and fatherhood in a completely new light. And it's never quite been the same again since, just because of that one experience.
This is amazing. And I want to just reiterate for those who are listening that the 10 trips are yours. You're not researching.
No. And to be honest, 10 trips is an understatement, because the way I set up the research with the pandemic was that I ended up doing about 40 trips in 60 days, which is way more than I would recommend clinically for anyone. But I had just organized things with different departments in South America and here and there and everywhere. And I was just on a roll. So I went with it. And, having had no drugs for 25 years, I was suddenly kind of barely able to write my own name for a couple of months. But nonetheless. And it's interesting that even though I probably finished the research for the book about a year ago, I've not taken psychedelics since. I mean, there's psychedelics are the definition of too much information. You make these huge downloads in all aspects of your life, and it seems to me that it takes quite a long time to turn those into kind of useful practices. It's not enough to experience something. You've then got to convert them into new habits and new disciplines, and that's tricky.
And this is where I think the skeptical part of me comes in, is how responsible are the guides in helping the client or the patient synthesize the information that sort of presents itself when one is on one of these adventures or on a trip,
Yeah, I think it's a misnomer because some guides will say the medicine is the guide. You don't really need a guide. We're just a container for the length of the experience. But I think in the more successful and efficacious trials, the actual experiences have been backed up by hours of subsequent therapy to help integrate and convert this raw material into stuff that's practicable, emotionally practicable.
Well, that's the academic side of the brain saying, well, wait a second, it's one thing to have the experience, and it's another thing, it's how you are able to put that data, put that download to use in one's life.
Right. And I think, that messes a little. Some of the narrative around psychedelics is that they're a shortcut for healing, that they can suddenly take someone that's profoundly sick or traumatized and flip a switch. And then 15 minutes later, in the case of Toad, they're going to come out with a new freshness that allows them to let go of the trauma altogether. And we just instinctively know that, if you work clinically, you just instinctively know that whilst there are incredible moments upon which everything pivots all of a sudden, it's only kind of consolidation and scaffolding those new experiences and making them part of the psychic furniture and the emotional landscape, which often requires effort and practice and repetition.
We are going to need to take a break. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with my guest today, Andy Mitchell. We're talking about psychedelia, tales of mind trips and healing. To learn more about Andy Mitchell, please visit andymitchell.org. Hang on, before we head out to the break, I want to remind everyone that good hair days are always happy days. And one of the ways I get to enjoy great hair days is with Nutrafol, the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement that's clinically shown to improve visible thickness and strength. Did you know that nearly 50% of all women are or will be impacted by weakened or thinning hair? If you're among them like me, you're not alone, and there is a solution you can trust to deliver great results. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting the root causes of thinning from within: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. In a clinical study, 86% of women experienced improved growth after 6 months of using Nutrafol Women's Hair Growth Supplements. Nutrafol has multiple formulas, including vegan. Each physician-formulated product is made with natural, drug-free, medical-grade ingredients in consistent doses for reliable results that I have experienced firsthand. What I love most about Nutrafol's whole-body approach to health is that in addition to thicker and stronger hair, the ingredients have stopped excessive shedding while helping improve my sleep, stress response, and those pesky menopause symptoms, including hot flashes. No matter your lifestyle or stage of life, Nutrafol is here to help you keep growing by improving your whole body health. Visit Nutrafol.com and take their hair wellness quiz for a personalized plan that targets better hair growth through a whole body health approach. Join me and millions of others who are celebrating great hair days with Nutrafol. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code HARVESTING. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code HARVESTING. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code HARVESTING. Now let's take that break. We'll be right back, and that is a promise. Research tells us that happiness is good for our health. Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow me on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for nutritious helpings of positive goodness. One thing I know for certain, happiness waits for no one, and at times we all need a little support. To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and at the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com to explore experiential online and on-site optimal lifestyle management consulting services, including recovery fortification and life crisis triage. And we're back, but before we get back to it, I want to remind you all how I'm obsessed with Skims and their Fits Everybody underwear collection of the butteriest undies on the planet. I've been wearing Skims for the past year, and I am a devoted convert. The social buzz is that their cotton loungewear is a game changer, and I must say that all the hype is 500% true and the quality is top notch. Skims cotton collection sets are the cutest and most flattering loungewear that is soft, stretchy, cozy, and streetwear worthy. Whether lounging at home, running errands, or traveling, these fabulous pieces are extraordinarily comfortable and fashionable. Skims is creating the next generation of loungewear for everybody. Athleisure wear is my professional uniform, and that means I'm always on the hunt for fashionable and relaxed garments that make me feel stylish and put together. My most favorite t-shirt of all time is the cotton jersey t-shirt from Skims. It holds its shape, wash after wash, hugs my curves perfectly throughout the day without stretching out, and comes in a bunch of great colors. The Skims cotton jersey t-shirt is my go-to base layer under jackets and cardigans for a put-together, on-the-go, dressed-up, or down look. This is Skims' most tagged collection. It's made with a classic cotton fabric for comfortable everyday wear. Made from ultra-soft and natural fibers, the cotton collection features elevated lounge pieces designed for comfort indoors and outside. Whoever said loungewear was only for the house hasn't tried Skims. Available in sizes extra, extra small to 4X. Believe the hype. Skims has over 100,000 five-star reviews for a reason. The cotton collection and more are available now at skims.com. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $75. If you haven't yet, be sure to let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you missed the big news, Skims reinvented underwear for women, and they are now doing it for men, also available at skims.com. Now let's get back to it. And we're back, continuing the conversation with my guest today, Andy Mitchell. We're talking about psychedelia, tales of mind trips and healing. Let's get back to it. So, Andy, you so beautifully described your journey, which involved dozens of trips, actually, a lot more than 10. But you described one to me in our conversation before we got started about one of the most powerful trips not involving psychedelics at all.
Yeah, I wanted to, being a scientist, I wanted to use a control experiment. And that was and the control for this was like entering a new culture for me, a culture that was very different from my own, that used plants, but not psychedelic plants. And this was the Kogi culture of the Sierra Nevada in Northern Colombia. And the Kogi, I'd learned about them first when I was a monk in my 20s, and they were like the Jedi of all spiritual people. They live at 4,000 meters, so they were largely untouched by the Spanish colonization in the 16th century. Their culture, therefore, has remained largely the same for the last 1,500 years. And now the priest class are taken at birth and kept in caves high in the mountains, in the dark, for the first 18 years of their life, where they are taught the sort of Kogi cosmology, the Kogi way of seeing the world. And in the dark, they learn how to map their own bodies and their sensations and their perceptions onto the universe above them in the night sky, and also the earth around them, which they call the mother. And out of this, they develop this idea that reality is always being sown by the mother through the body into the universe. And it's incredibly complicated, but they basically learn to read everything that's happening in their bodies and around them in nature as some kind of foretelling of what is about to happen. And so I went to this Kogi priest, and he made this 4-hour divination of my future using the way that the ants moved on the earth, the way that my body felt to him, the way that his own body felt. He was chewing toka leaves, which for the Kogi are not, it's nothing like cocaine. It's a way of providing a kind of nutrition for them, as they're very restricted diets. And it's also a way of bringing light to their felt sense of the world around them. And so using this coca leaves and this 18 years of training, he made these divinations about me. And it just made me think that this is really the most quintessential psychedelic experience, because this psychedelics comes from the Greek, meaning mind manifesting. And every single moment was manifesting something for this priest about my mind and about where it sat in the nature to reality. And I just, so yeah, in terms of his divination, he was quite accurate about my character. I'm a skeptic, but he got me to a T, really, and he made a prediction about me having another child, which I was kind of a little bit downbeat about, having just brought 2 kids through adolescence. But there you go. That was the prediction. Nonetheless, it just showed the connection that this man had to his environment and to the world around him, and the strangeness with which and mystery that evoked in him was, for me, the most powerful psychedelic experience of them all.
That is fascinating. And I have not heard of the Kogi, but I will be researching this because I find it very interesting, and it expands the definition of sort of consciousness, subconsciousness, spirituality.
Exactly.
And the cosmic wheel, if you will.
And it's interesting. It's particularly interesting in the sense that in neuroscience now, there's a lot of theoretical debate about the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. And we've got sort of very traditional arguments for what are called material arguments, where the brain, all we have to do is find the mechanisms in the brain that are responsible for consciousness. But in quantum physics and in other parts of neuroscience, this materialism is just discarded. And in fact, they're moving more towards the kinds of beliefs about consciousness that the Kogi have, who have had them for thousands of years. So this idea that we've progressed from Kogi culture and are moving inexorably towards the truth of the brain is being given the lie by the sort of the most sophisticated ways of thinking about consciousness and reality.
Well, the idea that it's almost like there's nothing new under the sun, like with all of this advancement, with all of the ways that we are able to measure, as in you having the trip in the lab versus having the trip with the tribe, right? That we're basically at the same place in a certain
or even
sense.
Sort of slightly behind them. And we're certainly behind them in terms of to what extent we respect our relationship to place and our sense of each other and our interdependence and such like. I think we're not just the Kogi, but many of these indigenous tribes have got a much richer, a much healthier view of their relationship with their environment and each other than we have in the West.
And when we talk about treatments for psychology or treatment for trauma or the things that you see on a daily basis with your patients, that ultimately, that what you say, the word interconnectedness or interdependence is part of the medicine. And that's something that Western culture has we're bifurcated from it,
Yeah, it's almost like for all the great work that psychotherapy can do in terms of healing the self, the very notion of the self at the heart of psychotherapy is given the lie both by psychedelics, which are often exploding ideas of the self, and also by these indigenous cultures and these monastic cultures where interdependence and a lack of selfhood is the key to flourishing.
It makes me think of one of my professors in graduate school who talked about being outer referenced versus inner referenced, right? A Western person is inner referenced, right? It's all about me or I, the lower self or the ego. And as we elevate in consciousness, hopefully we become more outer referenced and see ourselves in the tapestry of the bigger blanket, if you will, or the bigger community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's what you describe as part of what makes this successful in these different tribes or within these different rituals.
And there's neuropsychology on this. These people actually see the world optically differently. They don't see individual items in a visual field. They just see figures and grounds constantly moving and interrelations between things. Their cortex lights up in different ways because of the way they see it. I just want to say that when I was with in terms of talking about the strangeness of life unfolding, when I was with the Kogi doing my divination, there was another man with me. And this guy was a stranger to me. And I don't know how the hell he turned up there. But when they did his divination, literally the sun got covered by black clouds and a crow descended on a dead tree nearby. And the priest took this man off to a quiet place and he gave him a speech. That night, this man and I lay under the stars in hammocks, spending the night there. And I asked him what he'd been told. And the man turned out to be the former head of the Lithuanian mafia and had 20 years of organized crime behind him, and had taken psychedelics in Peru and decided that he needed to change his life. And he'd come to this holy man for a divination.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the universe sensed the darkness surrounding him. I mean, that's how you would describe it, right?
That was the implication. Yeah. It was like a pantomime, stage managed universe, at that moment.
At a central casting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow, that is a great story. This is fascinating. And I am so grateful that you were able to come on and share snippets from these journeys, because these stories are amazing. And for anybody who is either skeptical or curious, I highly recommend 10 Trips, the new reality of psychedelics. My guest today has been Andy Mitchell. You can learn more about Andy and his work at andymitchell.org. He's not on social media, so hunt him down there. Once again, that's andymitchell.org. Andy, thank you. I'm so grateful you're here. Come back and hang out anytime. We could carry on this conversation for days, I have a feeling.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guest, Andy Mitchell, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another. Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes from our mental muscle toning libraries at harvestinghappinesstalkradio.com, toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about my global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following me on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced by me, Lisa Cypers Kamen, Andrea Mungeli, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the awesome team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Gus, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.